Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. I am your guest host, Josh Meyer, founder of Peak Legacy Partners. Today, my guest is the owner and founder of Delta Business Strategies. We are here with Darby Walsh. Darby's mission in his business is to help businesses write their operational playbooks. Darby, we appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. Beyond his role as an entrepreneur, Darby's also a husband and a father and a leader, like many of our guests and listeners to this show. He has an extensive background in the military, the Marine Corps specifically. So needless to say, he knows a thing or two about discipline. I'd say that's fairly accurate from what I know of him. Darby, thank you very much again for joining me. And I figured we would just kind of dive right in, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, let's get started.
Great. So tell us a little bit. I always love individuals that have served time in the military, hearing a little bit about the military journey and just kind of what that looked like for you, why you got into it. We'll start with there.
Yeah, I was going to college playing football. I had gone to college to play football and do some other, didn't have a goal or a major or bounce ball around. Wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew that I was getting restless. And I needed some adventure and took the plunge. And I just said, listen, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to go see the world, figure out what I'm going to do. And in the meantime, hopefully get kind of that wandering spirit and some of that discipline that I knew I was going to need later on in life. And then was the perfect time. And I decided that I would join the Marines because they were, in most people's opinion, the hardest branch of service. And I did it for the challenge. I did it just because, it was there. And so joined the infantry, really upset my recruiter after he got my test scores and wanted me to go do something a little bit more with a transferable skill. But, I was in it for adventure and action, and certainly the infantry served all those purposes, right? And gave me this level of discipline that has served me well later on in life. But also the big thing that I think it gave me the most of is just the ability to suffer a little bit. There were many nights being cold and wet and, possibly hungry or whatever in some place that I didn't want to necessarily be, although I really loved going everywhere I went. Just showed me that there was, it was just a thing. It was just temporary. And, I was going to eventually go someplace warmer and with a hot cup of coffee or a nice steak dinner or something. But yeah, suffering and just getting through it. It was the best, aside from family and things like that, it was the best time of my life. It was amazing.
A lot of metaphors with probably your time in the military, with your time as a business owner, with being either literally cold, wet, and hungry, or just figuratively cold, wet, and hungry, and also knowing that things are on the horizon that are, going to be a little bit more comforting, right?
Yeah, for sure. The ability to just withstand some of the stuff that I'm going through now is definitely stuff that I've learned in the past, right? So it certainly helped.
Yeah, very nice. Was there anybody in particular who kind of inspired that? Anybody whose legacy and your family history that encouraged or had left an impact on you that caused you to want to be a part of the Marines, other than just kind of want to blow off some steam and get a sense of adventure?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, unconsciously a little bit. A lot of my family, my father was in the Navy. I had a brother that was in the Army, a grandfather that was highly influential in my life, that because of some color blindness wasn't able to serve overseas, but had brothers that did. My grandfather on the other side served, World War II. And it was certainly something that was present in my life growing up, and awareness of all of that, those discussions and their stories of adventure were quite appealing to me.
Very good. What would you say? What are the big, obviously probably faced numerous challenges along the way during your military journey, but what would you say some of the biggest challenges were, and what were your greatest lessons that came from them?
I had gotten out of the military just before September 11th, and Then after things looked like we were going to go to war, I rejoined the Marines with the intention of going overseas. To use a football analogy, I'd been to a lot of practices, but never had a game, and looked at it as my way to serve. Little did I know that my wife was pregnant. She didn't know it either. And so the hardest thing was being away for the birth of my daughter and just having no control over that, right? That whole situation was beyond what I was able to influence and control, and having to be patient. I was able to make sat phone calls and things like that to check on progress, and certainly, plenty of correspondence. But it was roughly 3 months before I got to see my daughter and comfort my wife. And that was a big deal for me. I learned a lot from that time, especially because I'd gotten out so that I could enjoy all of that. I had plenty of friends that missed those opportunities, and I chose to unbeknowingly miss the first one.
Oh, I'm glad. It sounds like you've had a good amount of time to catch up since then, so that's certainly positive.
Yep.
Are there any ways that you relate that directly to your business today as you're operating, some of those challenges?
A little bit, right? So that patience is something that's tough, right? And so I don't really consider myself an entrepreneur. I don't feel like I have that visionary quality that a lot of entrepreneurs have. And I see a lot of it and I work with a lot of them. But I know that I've done, my business is on its way, I'm building it, right? I know that I've done a lot of things. I'm not comfortable with networking. I'm sort of an introvert by nature, but I know that I've built this foundation of this network that will soon start to deliver the referrals that I'm after. I've talked to a ton of people. I've done, a couple podcasts like this, and that patience, there's a lot of times where I sit in front of my computer and I go, there's got to be something I should be doing. And there probably is, right? But I know it's coming, and I know that I just have to tell myself, calm down, relax, utilize some of that patience that you've learned, and trust the instincts, trust what you've done to deliver that future end goal or that future place where you want to be.
Yeah. My mentors kind of refers to that as aggressive patience. It's like, doing what you can while being in that waiting period. So kind of influencing things to an extent, but certainly not trying to take matters completely into your own hands.
Yeah, I like that, aggressive patience. That's a great way to explain it.
Speaking of great ways to explain things, one of the things, as you and I were kind of preparing for this discussion, there was a term that came up that I love and I think I'm going to borrow, but it was about how we're not necessarily influenced by one single legacy, but you had actually coined a different term for it. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, micro legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, that was it. Can you describe that for us, or what your...
Yeah, so I think the discussion we were having, what you had asked me some question about what legacy was trying to live up to or something along those lines. And I really couldn't pinpoint it to any one aspect of my past, right? So whether it be my parents and their upbringing or my business life, my Marine life, whatever it is. But what I was trying to say, I guess, was there's little pieces of everything where I took the lesson learned, or maybe even just stole a piece of somebody else's legacy that I said, oh, yeah, no, this is something that I can use to my advantage, build what I want to build for me, right? Or for my family. And so there were a lot of these little things that all over the place, especially with a few really prominent individuals. But yeah, that was kind of my thinking of micro legacy.
Yeah, I love it. Really love that. And so let's get into what a couple of those were in your case. I know we talked on a couple of different topics, one of them being parenting and, who you are as a father and as a husband, and who kind of inspired you and whose legacy you're kind of following in the footsteps of, or micro legacy, as you will, if you will, in that department.
Yeah, certainly my parents, instilled in this legacy, or, there's no, people think of legacy, they think of this company or wealth or something, right? And my parents were just hardworking, blue collar people. And I really learned that ability to work hard from my parents, right? They did everything they could. And my story is not dissimilar to anybody, or probably similar to most folks, right? But I really learned that lesson from them was, hey, you just do what you have to do. You put your head down. Sometimes it's going to suck, and you just do your work and spend that time with your family, right? family dinners. We didn't have a lot of vacations and things like that, but we spent a lot of time together doing different things. Of course, this is before the internet and all this other, wonderful distractions that we've invented. That was really important to me. And my parents and I, they come and visit me, and we still play, Scrabble and board games together because it was just what we did and it's what they enjoy. But that was important to me. It's really hard nowadays. I mean, certainly those games that I played with my kids are a little bit different, but yeah, that was important, and that hard work from them.
Well, that's one of the things that I think is most important, and such a common misconception about legacy is just being a dollar sign or an asset level. But I think it's those little things like, your values and what you do together as family, the experiences, and just the overall feel that you create within your household. So I think people don't realize that they're creating that type of legacy, but I think a lot of times it's the most powerful aspect. So
Yeah.
glad to hear they had that positive influence on you. What do you envision or hope that your legacy, as far as your family specifically is concerned, to leave one day? What do you hope that looks like?
I mean, I hope it's similar, right? One of the other micro legacies that helped me and where I want to go with my family, and this is one that I really struggle with, was the time I got to spend with one of my grandfathers. And he was a really special guy, hard worker his whole life, just did his thing, had, 6 kids, but he knew how to have fun. He knew how to make light of things and not take it too seriously. And that's something that I really struggle with. And when I do struggle with that stuff, I try to think of him and live up to those lessons that he taught me. And I hope that my family looks back one day and go, this guy he was strict and he was hard on us, but we could make fun of him and he would laugh at it and he would do silly things with us. And we had a lot of fun together. And so I hope that's where I end up, or where that legacy goes, and that they pass that on to their kids.
That's an interesting perspective, because as fathers, it's like, you want to be the serious, somewhat disciplinarian and direct and lead your family well, but at the same time, you want to also be fun and source of enjoyment. Fine line.
And I think it's easier when they're smaller, right? Because, it was like a bunch of bear cubs rolling around, right? It was always wrestle time. I have 3 boys. They were always attacking me, and it was absolute best time, right? But then you have to eventually shift that, because 3-on-1 doesn't work after a while, and they start to pin you to the ground and you're the loser. But you have to then raise young men, right, to be respectful and strong and everything else. And it's tough. It's a tough gig for guys.
Imagine. Yeah, especially with 3, have your hands full there.
Yeah. Now 2 of the 3 are bigger than me. So, makes it real interesting.
Yeah. Let's, if you don't mind, let's shift gears a little bit and over to your business. And if I remember correctly, after your military career, you spent some time in the manufacturing business, and then you served as an executive for another service-based company. It sounds like you had a great deal of impact and success at those organizations. What caused you to kind of decide to leave that comfort and security that you may have had and try to make a run at things with your own business?
Yeah. So the bottom line of that question is that I wanted to build my legacy, right? So I wanted to build something that was me, right? And I did all of this other stuff at a time when I'm glad I did it, because I wanted to be there with the kids and everything as they were young and they were growing up. When they're teenagers, right, they want to spend less time with you anyways. Not that I certainly had that in mind, but as I began this journey, or as I was going through this journey of working for other people, I just said, you know what? I want my own thing. But I never had this great vision or this great idea or anything that I would do that I could say, yeah, this is my business. I'm going to sell this, provide this, or whatever. And eventually what ended up happening was a relative of mine hired me he had a fast growing service company, but he needed to kind of calm this chaos. And he's this true entrepreneur, visionary guy. And I learned a lot from him, but I'm the opposite. I'm this rules guy, systems and processes. As I started to put all this stuff in place and I sort of worked myself out of a job, I thought, what I'm good at, this is what I think I can provide for other people. And so it started to stick and I started to find some clients. But what I learned from Joe, and he's like I said, tried and true entrepreneur, was just, I call it the entrepreneurial bulldozer, right? They just don't have, there's not a wall that's going to get in their way. They're not going to allow themselves to fail. And so there's a lot of days where I've got my head in my hands and I'm just saying, it's got to get better than this, right? And you have this imposter syndrome and you're beating yourself up. And a lot of times I just go, what would Joe do? Right? I still talk to him all the time and I say, figure out what he would do, make my own version of it, and move forward with it. And a lot of times, right, because it's somewhere in between his thinking and my thinking, right, I get myself out of my comfort zone. It usually works, and I'm able to plow ahead.
Yeah. You can't have both voices in the room at the same time, literally, I guess, like, kind of meeting in the middle as far as making decisions from that,
Right.
Middle ground is probably pretty beneficial for you, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I had a conversation with a friend this morning and he was telling me something and, he was confiding in me in this problem that he had. And he said, I said, but you're being too hard here. And he goes, but I can't be too easy. And I said, the solution's probably in the middle, right? You have to compromise somehow. The extreme is never the answer.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You made a comment about kind of working yourself out of a job. The way that your business operates now, I know you have different varying duration of assignments when you work with a company. What does that typically look like? Is your goal to go in and solve an issue, set up systems, get the business on the right track, the way that they want to be functioning, and then move on to the next business? Or do you have long-term relationships with a lot of businesses you work with? What does that look like?
So there's two models. One of them is just to help them get off the ground with this process piece. What I find is a lot of businesses sort of neglect this process, documentation, improvement, just for a variety of reasons, most notably time. And so, like most things, it's this steep learning curve. So you can get a bunch of this work done, whether internally or have someone like me do it, but then it sort of plateaus out, right? And it becomes a little bit easier. And there's a custodial piece to it. You just need to maintain what you have, tweak it as you need, make the adjustments so that you can continue to use it. And so what I tell my potential clients is that if you look at undocumented process almost as a liability, right? It could walk out if it's entrusted to an employee and they've developed something, it could walk out the door at any moment. And if you haven't done anything with it, now you're rebuilding. You have to go back and figure it back out. If you spend the time to do the documentation, now it becomes an asset that you can use for your business. And if that person leaves, it's less of an impact. But what it also will help you do is build trust and help you delegate things. So what ends up happening is you can do that big front end, real steep learning curve piece together. I can supply a bunch of time that gets it done faster than a lot of times when people can get it done themselves, so that it's less exposure, less risk exposure. And then once that's done, I can also be a part of maintaining it into the future if you'd like, right? There's no reason to hire somebody to do this work like full time for most businesses, right? It's a part-time thing. The thing is, if you assign somebody part-time, you're taking them out of their seat. So to answer your question, it can be both, right? It can be just kind of customer specific as to if it's short or long term.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the one thing you said within that, just in case anybody missed it, that was mind-blowing to me, is that you can kind of take somebody in a relatively short amount of time from being in a position of vulnerability, or like you said, if the person who knows the stuff leaves, then you're out of luck. And then you can take that position to turning it into an asset where you have security and structure and solidarity inside of a business. That is such a enormous swing. And I'm sure by a relatively small investment of time and energy and resources. But yeah, that's incredible. It seems very impactful.
Yeah. And it frustrates me that more people don't do it, whether they do it on their own or engage with someone like me. I know that was my path to success, right? I mentioned earlier that I was bored at one point. What I had found was that as I did this work, and I think that we'll probably tie this into a business owner legacy here in a few minutes, right? But what it allows you to do is, as you tie all that, I forgot my point now. Oh, I worked myself out of a job. So as I came in, there was no process, and we got to this point of process, and now allowed me to refocus my effort, right? Fortunately for me, maybe unfortunately for Joe, he and I decided to part ways. that time could have been used for anything, right? Growth or whatever. I chose to go and build my own business. And that's really the super impactful part as owners are trying to scale up their business, right? Is to create capacity or create time for people without having to add people unnecessarily.
Yeah, just increase the efficiency, right?
Yeah. Yeah, efficiency for sure. But it's also a balance of in the business, on the business, right? If you're an owner and you're working in the business, if you're actively generating revenue and doing this stuff, you're not, on the other hand, going and purchasing assets or whatever, it makes it more difficult, right? And that time usually is going to come from your family, right? You're going to sacrifice your family for that time. What we can do is if we can build some trust and delegate tasks to the lowest level, then that owner, that entrepreneur can start to work on the business and they can start to scale and grow. Just gives them time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think you read my mind on a couple of different things right there. And so let's go there if we could. As we start to wind down a little bit, I wanted to talk to you about the impact that you envision your business having on the legacy of others. I wanted to mention real quickly that the reason I invited you onto the show is because I really see the work and how your company has the potential to empower other business owners to really fulfill their own legacies. And as you just alluded to, whether that's the financial capacity or just time with their family so that they can build a legacy of impact and meaning within their family. But how do you view that as far as your impact and your business impact?
Yeah, it's, when you start a business or when you start any endeavor, right, you have this end goal in mind, right? But the world we live in, you can get bogged down in detail very quickly. You can get bogged down in problems very quickly. And so you can continue to solve those problems yourself, or you can outsource those problems to somebody else, right? And in the case of outsourcing it to your employees, that's great, but you have to trust them to do it right. I've talked to so many business owners that just say, I just keep doing this because I don't trust the people to do it. And I say, okay, all we have to do is take what's in your head, how you want it done, and put it into a format that is exactly the way you want it done and teach somebody else how to do it. And then now you never have to do that ever again. And then now you can go and now actively work on whatever that end goal or whatever that legacy you're trying to build, whether it's generational wealth or just freedom or whatever it is. But you've got to outsource it to somebody else or just be happy doing it yourself, right? I'm at the point where I'm still doing it all myself. But I've had people ask me, what happens when okay, well, when I get to that point, I'm going to outsource it to somebody else, whatever. And so what I see as my mission is to really get people, get business owners to trust their employees with accurate, well thought out, efficient business processes and communicate it to them, right? Because there's two things, right? You can document it all you want, put it in a 3-ring binder and stick it on a shelf somewhere, and it hasn't done anybody any good. Now you just paid for a bunch of paper or computer files, right? It's really the communication of that documentation, then it starts to accelerate scalability and growth. I love when I look into the owner's eyes and I can see the relief drain out of their, or the tension drain out of their face when I say, you never have to think about this ever again until we're just revising it or fixing it or whatever. And then they teach it and they know that it's being done exactly the way they want it to be done.
Yeah. What is your quick tip for how you actually distribute once those ideas are put in a format where it can be delegated? Do you have a quick tip on the best way to kind of communicate that to employees?
Yeah, there's a ton of software out there you can use. A lot of people just use Google. You can share documents. You can subscribe to software. I personally like Trainual, but it allows video, it allows screenshots. Most of them do. They're all the same. They just have different names. But depending on your budget, depending on your organization, depending on how many people you have and how you want it to be reported out, yeah, get some help. Use the technology to your advantage. That couple $100 a month in investment will be, peace of mind for you over and over and over again. It also adds accountability, right? You can say, hey, Josh, you received the training, and there may be a dispute like, hey, the training was wrong, or no, sorry. Yep. I just didn't follow it. Okay. It's our proven process. Just do it.
Yep. And if it can be your voice of reason in the room when you don't have to be there, how much more valuable is that than whatever you have to pay for it, I'm sure.
Right.
Awesome. So as far as if you could just kind of put a cap on this for us, as far as your vision for the business owners that hire you to come in and get systems in place for them, how do you see them going from point A to point B, and what's your ultimate end game for them?
Yeah, my end game for them is just to save them time, right? There's so many businesses that are running lean. One of the things I always ask is, do you have anybody here that can do this work? And they say, well, I could get, it's just outsource it. I have the time, I have the expertise, and I'm not bothered by politics, right? And I let people know I'm going to ask you tough questions, right? If you tell me your process, for instance, I had a client one time and he said, we write it down, then we do something, then we write it down. And I said, but you already told me you wrote it down. And well, yeah, but that's the way we've done it, right? And I say, well, how long does it take? And well, it only takes 2 minutes. How many clients did you have last year? 1,000. And then you can see the wheels spinning, and then, right, the little accounting wheel. And then, oh, wait a minute, hang on. And I'm not afraid to ask those questions. I don't have the bias of, talking to the process creator, and he's advocating for his own process, right? And so there's a bit of perspective there. And if you can get that time and you can get that perspective all in one neat package, and then get everything kind of delivered to you at the end into this asset that you can use, for me, it's a win-win situation, right? Plus, things change or whatever. Hey, we got to make an addendum or whatever. And it's an easy fix, right?
A huge amount of value there for businesses thinking about succession plans and things like that you'd be a huge asset to those type of folks. But so we'll leave it on that. For any of our listeners who want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I've got my website, deltabusinessstrategies.com, or darby@deltabusinessstrategies.com. You can get a hold of me. I can work in person. We can work virtual. And I will do all the heavy lifting, really. I just need to extract it out of your brain, and then everybody can go back to work. And then I can deliver some documentation for you. And then we can coach through about how to train people to those processes. So.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being here, Darby. I know it's gotten my wheels spinning, and I'm sure that the same is the case for everybody that's listening. So you're a huge asset. I appreciate what you're doing for business owners, and especially in the manner that it frees up more time to spend some time with their families. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thanks, Josh.
Absolutely. Folks, my guest again today was Darby Walsh. For more information on Darby and the work that he does, please visit his website, as he mentioned, at deltabusinessstrategies.com. Ends up being 3 S's there in the middle, just in case you're spelling it out. And then he can be emailed also at darby@deltabusinessstrategies.com. We will link all of his information in the show notes. And Darby, thank you again.
Yep, absolutely. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.